This week, we welcome Jody Brazil, CEO at Fireman, to discuss security hygiene, doing all the little things right all the time. In the leadership and communication section, CISOs are still chiefs in name only. Defining reasonable cybersecurity, security leaders find value in veterans to solve cybersecurity skills shortage, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. It's time to rethink how we approach cybersecurity because the reality is modern cyber attackers are already past your initial defenses. ExtraHop helps your security team find and eradicate advanced threats before real damage is done. Protect your enterprise and customers with better defense. Learn more about how ExtraHop stops advanced threats at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Legacy GRC systems cannot support the powerful, real-time automation and oversight that organizations require to take risks that matter to succeed. CyberSync continuous control automation ingests data from the IT GRC stack to update controls against regulatory requirements and risks in real time, delivering insights and visibility. See how members of the Fortune 500 are saving millions annually by visiting securityweekly.com/CyberSync. Endpoint security is designed to protect every device in your fleet, wherever it may be. These days, that can be a lot of different places. Find out how HP Wolf Security uses emerging strategies like application isolation, along with a zero-trust approach and framework to give you a powerful, manageable, usable solution to your growing and increasingly spread-out security challenges. Learn how HP Wolf Security can make a difference across your endpoints at securityweekly.com/HPWolf.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 254, recorded March 14th, 2022. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado for 3 more shows, counting this show. Just 3 more left in Colorado. Joining me remotely are my co-hosts. First, from Rhode Island, Mr. Jason Albuquerque.
Hey, Matt, how goes? Had a great weekend. The weather's looking promising here in New England. We're thinking 50s, 60s, so shorts weather. I love it.
And Brady comes out of retirement. Like, come on.
What the heck was that?
Inflation. It's inflation, baby.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. But he has one conversation with Cristiano Ronaldo, and I guess he decides to come back.
Yeah, just like that. Also joining today, stepping in for Mr. Ben Carr yet again, is Mr. Tyler Robinson. Welcome, Tyler.
Thank you. I don't even know if it counts as retirement if you don't miss a whole season, does it? I mean, even Jordan missed a full season, so.
But he announced he was retiring, and then he comes back. Like, what the heck? I don't know. Anyways.
Those soccer players are, persuasive.
I guess so. We'll see. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. My email is not the form. We review those suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. This segment is sponsored by Fireman. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Fireman. Jody Brazil is a seasoned entrepreneur with more than 2 decades of executive management experience and deep domain expertise in network security, including network security management and product development. Jody was previously the CEO at Fishnet Security, Fireman, and Disrupt Ops. I always have a challenge with that one. We got to rename that company, Jody. Jody, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
I know Mike and Rich extremely well. I've worked with both of them for a long time, and I just can't get over the name. It's something with my tongue. It doesn't work. So this segment it's titled Security Hygiene. And first, I want to say kudos, because most people call it cyber hygiene, right? We've gotten used to this term cyber hygiene. You actually use the proper term, in my opinion, which is security hygiene. But last week on the show, I was telling you as we were doing the prep for this, we're talking a little bit about approaches to building a cybersecurity program. And to me, a lot of where that core foundational element comes from is the basics. And I think one of the challenges, the basics aren't necessarily that sexy. Like, doing the basics are kind of like, maybe a little boring. I'd rather go build a SOAR solution or automate something or use some AI or ML, but it is such an integral part to like our core security program. So why do we struggle with it so much?
Oh, it's not fun. That's the basics. Hygiene's a good word. Obviously, we use it in our personal life. It's a bit like brushing your teeth every day. I mean, I don't think any of us would consider a root canal fun, but those complex technical challenges are generally what get security people, or more aptly, security engineers, really excited. They're fun things to go explore, test new technologies. But doing the basics, flossing your teeth every day, it's not fun, but it's what is necessary. And you mentioned Rich Mogul, good friends of both of ours, as Rich coined the term when we were at Disrupt Ops a few years ago, simple doesn't scale. It's not that these basics are hard. Some of them are maybe more challenging than others, but most are not difficult at a certain size. If you only have a handful of devices to secure, you know what to do. You make sure that they're patched daily, and it's just not that difficult. When you scale to hundreds of thousands of assets or users, it becomes really challenging. Those simple tasks become very difficult. Simple doesn't scale.
Yeah, and my tagline on this, I had that simple didn't scale at first, and then I changed it. I said, doing all the little things right all the time. Like, think
That's
about
right.
that for a second. It's the little things. It's little things like asset management, patch management, configuration management, doing them all right, but all the time, because it only takes one miss of one of those changes to not happen. And the next thing you know, I have a gap in my environment that I didn't see. And the next thing you know, an attacker exploits it.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. It's an unfair game, right? The attackers only have to exploit it once and to claim victory. We have to be right all of the time. And the reality that we deal with is that it is those mistakes, those simple misconfigurations that get exploited. There's only a handful of capable parties, state entities, maybe some amazing black hat attackers that have the ability to truly build a 0-day and exploit it. It's just not the reality. What more often happens, what generally puts us at risk, even for the most extreme examples of breaches over the last 20 years, is something simple. It's a misconfiguration. And we can definitely dig in on some of those examples that have plagued us over the last couple decades.
Yeah, I want to say the last number I saw was 90+% of, perimeter firewall breaches were misconfiguration, right? It's not 0 days. Yeah. It's not anything elaborate. It's misconfiguration of your firewalls.
Yeah, Gartner coined that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Gartner coined that many years ago. 99% of breaches through a firewall will be due to misconfiguration. And that's probably understating it, right? We don't generally look at a Palo Alto or Fortinet and say, well, all the security vulnerabilities in that firewall is what's going to cause us to get breached. No, it's not because the firewalls are poorly built. It's because that we poorly maintain them. And we create policies that explicitly allow access that ultimately become the attack paths that lead to breaches.
Does that simple configuration or getting those simple things actually exist in today's organizations? I mean, we have such complex needs and requirements just to scale out to something like a hybrid cloud, and then you add in, a CDIC pipeline, and then you add in just adding upgrades and updates and remediation tasks that change configurations. Like, a lot of this does rely on people and processes and having those, those SOPs up to date and having a real good process and managing all of those pieces. But even with all that, all of the complexities don't lend themselves very well to being able to simplistically do the things right that are simple.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. They don't scale, which is kind of the point. And I like the way you added people and process to the conversation. Once you get past the handful of devices. And it really doesn't have to be a very large environment because the technology we deal with is pretty complex. So even in small and mid-size environments, the complexity of those environments, the technologies in use, maybe it's hybrid environment, cloud plus on-prem, the complexity of those environments makes manual processes to secure the environment untenable. Right? It's not going to work. And so even at a mid-size, but certainly at the enterprise scale, it's going to take processes at a minimum, and we would highly recommend automation as well as part of the solution, to deal with what at a micro scale, at an individual element, is not difficult, right? It's not hard to change a firewall policy. Nobody would consider that a difficult task. The technical steps to change the firewall or to change a permission on an S3 bucket, right? It's not just about firewalls, obviously. So those tasks are easy at a certain scale, at the quantity of one. Changing the permissions on that S3 bucket's easy. But what do you do in the environment when you're creating hundreds of buckets a day, or you're making potentially 300 or 1,000 firewall changes a week? What do you do at that kind of scale? That's where technology has to come in to play a role. Whether in the cloud environment, there's all sorts of technologies of cloud security posture management, CSPM technologies that do continuous assessment of the environment to identify the misconfigurations, or whether it's a solution like Firemon, obviously, that will do network security policy evaluation to discover those misconfigurations. I think it's fair to say that the complexity that we operate in, it's impossible to accomplish manually.
Right. Unless you're one. What Sean told me a long time ago as my chief architect, he said it's one or it's N. And never make it N to the N, because then you get into crazy loops and the computer doesn't scale anymore. But it's not, because as soon as you leave single state, it's unlimited, really, at the end of the day. And I think that's the issue with doing all the little things right all the time, is it's easy if it's one, but it's not easy when it's N.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not, I like to point out, just so that we're not making people feel bad about themselves, this isn't a simple problem. We can take some companies, and I'll use Citigroup as an example because it's a well-known published example from a couple of years ago, of an organization that does a lot of things right, particularly when it comes to cloud and cloud security, recognized for doing a lot of things right. And the breach that occurred, I think it was 2019, that resulted in hundreds of thousands of consumer records being exposed, was a good example of a misconfiguration, a very basic misconfiguration. The one that we remember the most, if you remember the attack, was the attack vector. The original attack vector was SSRF, so server-side request forgery. And for the most part, while there was a lot of attention on it, I think a lot of us in the industry gave some grace to Citi because of a few things. One, the attacker was an ex-AWS employee that had some, not inside knowledge about Citi, but some inside understanding of how AWS worked, and they exploited that. Also, SSRF, while well understood, this was not a new problem. It was the complexity as it related to how the meta service worked within AWS was not something that everybody knew, and so we all kind of felt vulnerable, like, ooh, we could have fallen victim to that. What sometimes gets lost is that somewhat novel attack vector, again, it was well understood, not that it was novel, but it was fairly unique in how it was used, is what got a lot of the attention. What we sometimes miss is the fact that none of the data would have been exposed, except that the S3 bucket where the data was actually harvested from was misconfigured to roughly allow access from any resource, or certainly a broader set of resources or roles than it should have. And had that S3 bucket been properly configured, the SSRF attack would have not mattered. They wouldn't have gotten access to the data. And so here's an organization that spends hundreds of millions of dollars on security. They're recognized for doing it right. And a simple misconfiguration on an S3 bucket leaves them exposed. And the net result of it is the hundreds of thousands of customer records are exposed.
Yes, but that means you know that you have this S3 cloud bucket sitting out there that is has to be configured correctly. And I always go back to asset management, like 101. What do I have? What hardware assets do I have? What software assets do I have? So I know what to protect. That's still a big challenge for organizations. And like that's the foundation to a security hygiene program is know what I have. How do we get our arms around asset management? Because the example you just brought up, City, I mean, hundreds of thousands of devices all around the world. Like it's a massive problem. Even if you're not that big, it's still tough because I have stuff sitting at home networks now. I have stuff sitting in my data center. I have stuff sitting in the cloud. Like that asset management 101 is still a big challenge in building out a security hygiene program, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of solutions to it. We've got a lot of the tools in place today. You've got your Active Directory. I mean, the cloud is a great example where the cloud infrastructure is an inventory system itself. It's accessible via the API and quite easy to enumerate what you have. Difficult to keep up with at the speed at which things change. Firemon, we own a product called Lumeta that's exactly what it's done. You may remember back in the late 90s, a company famous for mapping the internet. That was Lumeta, and the underpinnings of that same technology is applicable today to go do continuous discovery of all your assets. A good example of why that's so important is doing gap analysis. So, for example, let's say you buy the latest and greatest endpoint security technology. We'll just use CrowdStrike as an example, right? Great endpoint technology, well regarded. It only works if it's actually installed on all of the relevant endpoints. So one of the things you need to do is discover all those endpoints. As you said, inventory, right? Just understand what you have so that you could identify maybe gap analysis, right? You find that you have 100,000 endpoints, but you've only got the endpoint agent installed on 95,000 of them. So you've got a gap there of 5,000 endpoints that you need to have protected. And as many of us, I'm certainly a huge proponent of zero trust, and I see a groundswell in the industry of more and more people seeing that as the right path forward. It's a good example where if you don't know what assets you have, you're fundamentally going to fail at zero trust. The whole point of zero trust is controlling access down to the resource level. And so step one is understand all the resources you have. So for anybody that's looking to make that step or start their journey on the path to zero trust, inventory is a great place to start.
Yeah, that's huge, right? So it's know what you have, it's know what the gaps are in what you have, and then how do we remediate those gaps in an efficient and effective way? And that's where I think automation comes into play, because as someone leading a security team, I'm trying to figure out how to maximize my human capital investment, right? And have them focusing on the strategic. A lot of the things that we were talking about are say easy, do hard, right? I mean, ultimately, if you have to go, we talk about patch all the time, but, and making sure we're keeping up with patches, but that's one of those items. Again, it's say easy, do hard. So how do we leverage automation and the orchestration capabilities to know what we have, find the gaps, automate the remediation as much as we possibly can? Because I'm having trouble hiring folks, right? Security professionals aren't growing on trees these days, and I need my team focusing on the more strategic items if we can.
Yeah, the easy say do hard. Do you mind if I steal that phrase? That's another good one that goes along with simple doesn't scale. It is, right? And there are really good practices. Early on, you brought up the comment about people and process being core to this. 100% agree. So good processes, and a lot of times automation as a piece of that process, is fundamental to getting this right. I tend to think better with concrete examples, and so cloud is a good example where we have made really good progress as a security industry in moving towards infrastructure as code is the right solution to securing cloud environments. And it piggybacks off all the hard work that the DevOps teams are doing, which they learned these hard lessons along the way of it's really hard to maintain a consistent infrastructure as part of your application when you're doing it ad hoc or one-off, so with manual clicks in the console or even through CLI. So instead, we adopt patterns, in this case infrastructure as code, that allows us to codify our intent. Let's put this in code, and every time we push our infrastructure, use our CI/CD pipeline to push out the new deployment, all of our past learnings over the last 2 years are codified into that infrastructure code, and we can be certain that it always goes out the same way. And security can learn a lot from that approach, and in many cases piggyback off of that approach, at least in those cloud environments that are using those infrastructure as code and code CI/CD pipelines for deployments, to make sure that the security technologies and configurations are deployed in a similar fashion, which is great, and strongly support that. What's interesting, at least in my world with Firemon, is that we've seen something somewhat like that for the last 20 years with firewall policies, where to a large degree, if you're familiar with, say, a Palo Alto firewall or a Checkpoint firewall, Fortinet has the same thing. They all have a management platform. And you could think of that as like the control plane of, or similarly parallel to the control plane of a cloud environment, where you're managing the policy at the central repository, not dissimilar to a GitHub, right? So the policy exists there. Certain people have the right to go in and mutate that policy. And it's the living history of what right should look like. And then that policy gets deployed to those endpoints, in this case firewalls, to go enforce that policy. And so lots of parallels here to the way a CI/CD pipeline would work, or infrastructure as code, kind of the combination there. But it doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that they're going to get it right. Just because you've got a good process in place, you also have to make sure that those changes that are being put into GitHub that are then automatically deployed are being tested, right? So in CI/CD, you think of that pipeline. Yes, we're always doing revision control, so we can revert back, and we always have a current state that could be repetitively deployed. So you can just click of a button deploy it. All that's good, but something else that's in the middle of that process, in that CI/CD pipeline, is a testing process, and it's a go no go decision. If it doesn't pass our say regression tests, or our smoke tests, or whatever other tests you put in for your software, then the deploy will be blocked and stopped until somebody goes and fixes that mistake. Interestingly, that parallel does not exist in my example of the firewalls. Yes, you have the same constructs, this idea of a central management platform where you configure the rules, users have control, you mutate those policies, and then they can be deployed and you can revert them back, all those things. But what was missing was the test. Where's the security test to make sure that the policy that was created, the rule that was changed, isn't exposing the organization to greater risk? And to me, that's just a great example where the security industry just hasn't caught up. A lot of good principles and processes in place, and yet we're still just missing what I think is a really critical step here to make sure that we're not introducing mistakes or risks to the organization.
Yeah, it's infusing, change management policies and procedures, standard operating procedures, along with quality assurance, right? I mean, just embedding that in our procedures, making sure we're doing true change management.
Exactly.
Yeah. Doing what you're describing. Go ahead, Tyler.
I was going to say, doing that automated at scale also makes a big difference, because a lot of places do have change management. There is a process. There are people that do that, but everyone's overworked. There's not enough good people looking at this, code or changes in order to make educated guesses. They don't have the time to do the testing. They don't have the knowledge to do the security evaluation. So we do need the technology there to enable the people to do those processes more efficiently and not make mistakes, and provide additional time and resource because it's more efficient. Like if we could make something like this happen for cloud environments, for Active Directory, all of these authorized changes that have to be approved, and you've got this secure pipeline of authorized and remediation that happens with a good secure blockchain that could evaluate that and keep track of it, that would be something that would make a pretty big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. The manual reality that exists. So banks tend to be highly regulated, and a good example of somebody, organizations trying to put in processes to control this. What happens in those environments is that you get stressed. If it takes, there's an example of a customer that uses what they call red rules, where all new changes go through a change process and a team of people that does a red rule review. Effectively, they're trying to do a manual review to make sure that the rule doesn't violate their literally hundreds of page document that says what good and bad looks like. And they do a red rule review, and then they are the gate. So instead of an automated testing QA process, it's a manual human intervention QA process. the result of that is that a network security policy change in that environment can take 3 or 4 weeks. And it's, from a security perspective, maybe that's okay. We think that it's that important, and we're going to take this time to make sure that it's right before it gets pushed out. But from a business perspective, maybe that was okay 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Today, that's simply not acceptable. So,
and that's the conundrum we're going to run into, right? Because now we're going to get pressure from the business, and we're going to have to expedite the change, right? So that's where we start falling on our face, because now we're having to run faster because the business is dictating it. The pressure's on the CIO or the CISO, whoever's getting the pressure from the CEO, and now all of a sudden there's a push to expedite the change.
Yeah, and so the security, we know this. We don't run the business, right? Security is there to serve at the behest of the business, so we have to keep up with the business, right? We can, I guess, push for as long as we can and say, no, slow down. We got to review this, but at some point the business is going to run us over and go around us and then go do whatever. And so security is going to have to react. And the right way to react is we spend millions of dollars. Well, industry spends billions and approaching hundreds of billions of dollars on security infrastructure and technology. Think these different technologies we talked about today, a Checkpoint, a Fortinet, a Palo Alto, a CrowdStrike, right? The list goes on and on. All great technologies. But we should be reserving some portion of that budget to improving our processes, providing some automation capabilities so that we can effectively manage all these great technologies that we spend all this money purchasing.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? Spending the money wisely, strategically, not just spending money to spend money and buy new tools and, buy the shiny new technology. It's investing in the right places.
Yeah, and I like cloud. It's such a green field or greenish field compared to our traditional IT infrastructure. There is so much awesome security capability when you adopt public cloud that is natively built in the cloud infrastructure, and yet we still screw it up. Why are there so many breaches that have been publicized on the front page of the Wall Street Journal? And it's not because the technology wasn't capable. It's because we didn't configure it correctly. It's just a great example of where we must spend more money, more time and energy supporting the security operations professionals so that they can win, right? So that they can accomplish what they're paid to go do, which is to maintain and manage the security infrastructure.
Yeah. Jody, I'm going to propose this because I think there's some lessons from DevOps that security can learn from and use in general. What you described earlier, the way I think about it is policy is code to an extent, right? That I codify policies that I can then use a CI/CD type process to push out, and validate is through that push out process, right? So when I think about the different steps in a CI/CD pipeline, I can do some static tests against certain policies that have been codified. I can kind of pass fail it, push it into production, and then use some dynamic runtime analysis tools to make sure that it still works in runtime or that it hasn't drifted from steady state. Like, should we think about security in the future is some sort of policy as code engine that allows us to learn from the DevOps world to actually enforce better security across our organizations?
100%. I absolutely think that's the right path forward. There are some good principles. Go back to zero trust is a good example of. I think there's some really good principles in that, but even that's not going to solve it. The point that I'll make when you talk about policy as code is, I completely agree. I think that's the right approach. And what largely is missing is that QA step, the static code and dynamic code analysis that you think of in the DevOps world. I don't think we've done a great job implementing that. We do vulnerability scanning, right? If there are some good examples, it's our vulnerability scanning, but that's highly limited to the scope of your entire security infrastructure. We're effectively just scanning for known vulnerabilities of missing patches, as an example. Certainly, red teaming is a really good example of people understanding that it's a problem and we need to invest time in it, but that's a very expensive and time-consuming process. It's also tends to be delayed, right? It's not active prior to changes, and it's as part of the static code analysis, and it tends to be days, weeks, if not months delayed in dynamic test analysis. So, yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount of energy that should be spent in our industry, taking some lessons from the DevOps world, and in particular around this idea of what you might classify as quality.
Yeah, because if I think about it, if I can codify it, then I can get some economies of scale. I can get some efficiency out of it. I can validate compliance. So compliance becomes an outcome because it's all documented in the code itself. Like this would solve so many challenges that I think organizations struggle with.
Yeah, completely agree. I'm heartened by the fact that Fireman has been building technology for this purpose for the last 20 years. Very, at the time, go back 20 years, very much focused on just the firewall. We've expanded far beyond that. But what I'm heartened by is the recognition of that has grown, both in the number of companies that now see this as a necessity, as well as the depth of understanding it, even going all the way up to a CIO or CISO. A really interesting topical example is some market interest that we've received over the last 3 weeks. Now, for very unfortunate reasons, but the invasion of Ukraine by Russia has led to an awareness, really just an awareness of a risk that says we are concerned about a potential cyber attack. Not we, but companies, right? Industries are concerned about a follow-on beyond the ground offensive of a cyber attack. And as a result, we've received a lot of inbound inquiries from companies that are asking very simple questions. They know they've spent a ton of money on their underlying security infrastructure, and yet at the CISO level, at the board level, they're asking really simple questions and are failing to find the equivalent simple answer. The simple question is, what risks do we have? Are we secure? Are we prepared? And that visibility, the answer to that question is hampered by the lack of visibility because of the complexity. Right? You've got these wildly complex environments, and so you hundreds or thousands of even firewalls that are deployed, as an example, and then at the the firewall administrator level, you're unable to answer basic questions. So we talk about codifying the policy. Well, the policy is codified, right? It's there. We have a policy, and it's enforced, and it's enforced across these hundreds of thousands of endpoints. The question is it right? And that one is a much harder, well, I shouldn't say much harder, but certainly more complicated answer than, say, when you talk about software and you're deploying software and you're running a test to make sure, does the application work? And there are some simple smoke tests, right? Can it process a transaction or whatever the application is supposed to do? And we tend to think in the terms of the positive. Does it work as it's supposed to? Security works in the negative. Does it prevent the thing that we don't want to have happen? Is it preventing that thing from happening? And that's very difficult to have continual awareness of, right? A user doesn't tell you. An attacker doesn't raise their hand and tell you, hey, your firewall's not configured correctly, like a user would using your application that says, hey, it's not working correctly. And so security has an additional burden of trying to find the thing that nobody will tell you about, find that negative gap. And so we need to invest in tools to go answer that question, so that when you're in this unfortunate circumstance of potentially heightened risk, can I be confident in my defenses?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that lends into the security paradox we were talking about last week. It's investments are up, but the threats continue to increase. Our ability to protect is getting hindered. Automation is up, but we're still having a hard time protecting. And then in the meantime, our security teams are burning out. So we're in the middle of this paradox right now, and it's absolutely right. We need to start leveraging the technologies to our benefit.
And that is sad that we are at this place as an industry, because our entire role, our entire job is to evaluate and provide the business with an understanding of what their risk is and the mitigations to those. So our understanding of the business risk is not there, and our ability to mitigate those risks is not there because we don't have that visibility. So we really have to get better at this in order to kind of do our jobs and perform our function.
Yes, the challenges of security hygiene. Jody, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Absolutely enjoyed it, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. If you want to learn more about Fireman or how to scale the little things, please visit securityweekly.com/Fireman. We'll take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.